Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Bapak Ibu sekalian, insan pendidikan yang saya kasihi, selamat pagi. Kita hadir kembali dalam acara Pagi, Pakar Berbagi. Kali ini narasumbernya dari Singapura. Beliau adalah Mr. Darian Tan. Good morning, Darian. How are you?
Good morning, I'm good. You?
Good, good, good. Thank you for your time and then, sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom to us. And I heard that schools in Singapore now are closing.
Yeah,
Is it
that's right.
true?
That's true.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, I guess the virus has definitely crept back into Singapore, and it's kind of coming back a bit. But of course, the schools are much more ready this time because of the previous lockdown. Of course, with every single so-called lockdown, schools are getting more prepared. Teachers are understanding better what works better for students also.
I see. So it's interesting. Bapak Ibu sekalian, apa yang barusan saya tanyakan ke Darian adalah tentang kondisi sekolah di Singapura. Sekolah di Singapura ini ternyata tadinya itu dibuka dari tahun lalu, bulan Mei kemarin ditutup malah. Kenapa? Karena tadi Darian mengatakan virusnya kelihatannya semakin mengganas nih kan gitu. Nah ini satu hal yang kita juga harus pikirkan bersama dengan rencana pemerintah untuk membuka sekolah secara masif di bulan Juli. Singapura yang jauh lebih baik penanganan COVID-nya daripada Indonesia saja malah menutup sekolah, kita malah ingin membuka sekolah. Ini yang tentunya sangat berbahaya. Oke, Darian, before we start, can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, so the audience can know more about you and what you do, and the things that, in overall, what would you like to share with us today? Go ahead.
Right, sure. So, my name is Darian. Hi, good morning, everyone. So, I'm actually together with MCE, Marshall Cavendish Education, part of the digital solutions team. So, what we do as part of the digital solutions team is that we speak to schools, we work with schools, because obviously, Marshall Cavendish has a long history of publishing pedagogically sound materials. I'm sure some of you today in the audience are using our textbooks. Some of us would, of course, in recent times, definitely we have moved into digital. And I think one thing that we're really proud about is that our digital materials are also just as pedagogically sound, just as great as our textbooks. So during this period, definitely what we do as the digital solutions team is that we speak to different schools and we see how we can help them, what kind of solutions can help them out during this period of COVID-19. So yeah, that's a little introduction of myself and what my team does.
Okay, thank you. Uh, a little bit about MCE. You guys are not only serving Singapore market, right? But like different part of Asia. Like including Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia, all those places. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we serve almost all the countries in Asia,
Okay.
Southeast Asia, of course, Philippines, Malaysia, but we also go further into maybe even Vietnam and even the Middle East, and also even in US. US schools do use our books. So we like to say
Oh, okay.
about 70 countries, 70 markets that we're in right now.
Wow, that's pretty big. So basically, you have knowledge on how those countries cope up with this pandemic, right? I mean, for the education segment, like how they do it. Just a little information for you. Can you guess what kind of app that mostly being used for Indonesian teachers during this home-based learning? Can you guess?
Hmm. Um, Maybe I would guess maybe Google Classrooms because it's the most easily accessible. Either that or maybe just
Hmm.
Zoom.
No, you will be surprised. It's WhatsApp.
Ah,
Right?
so how do teachers use it?
Well, that's I'm even myself, still wondering how would teachers teach using WhatsApp. But that's our MOE, like compile or this data, actually most teachers using WhatsApp to teach, which is not effective, of course, because WhatsApp it's not built, it's not designed for teaching and learning purposes. It's for short messaging only, right? But so without further ado, I will give you the stage. We want to hear, like all the strategies, the ideas, and maybe you can share, like which country doing this, which country doing that, and also especially Singapore as well. Okay, go
Okay,
ahead, Terian. Time
sure.
is yours.
So I'm just gonna share my screen. Please give me a second. So my screen should be showing up on your end really quickly. I'll just give
Yep.
everyone maybe another 5 to 10 seconds for it to load. I understand that sometimes there's a delay. So yeah, okay. So I'll start. Once
Absolutely.
again, good morning. So I guess usually I will start by saying that like it's quite unfortunate that we have to meet online this time round. I think usually if it was any circumstances, I think usually we would be gathered together, meeting face to face. But I guess it's also definitely because of the current circumstance that we are gathered this way, and also because of the current circumstance that I'm asked to prepare on this topic, strategies and ideas for home-based learning. I guess before COVID, it's not something that is relevant to educators at all. I mean, if you want to, if we are, going to school, there's no need for home-based learning too much. So I guess we spoke earlier, about how at MC we are able to speak to a lot of different teachers and schools, and interestingly also a lot of parents also from all over the world. So in this way, we are able to help, with some struggling schools with their home-based learning. I think during this period, apart from helping struggling schools, we also learn a lot from impressive and resilient schools during this period. Also, I think what was shared earlier about WhatsApp actually was really, really interesting to me. I think at the end of the day, even though WhatsApp might not be the best tool out there, I think it's really impressive that no matter what is available, teachers still try to make it work. I think that's the best thing that I've heard so far. So yeah, so today just want to share some ideas that we picked up along the way. Hopefully you might find some useful. Some of them you might want to tweak them a bit, or maybe some of them you might not find as useful. But hopefully at least there will be something that you'll be able to implement over the next week, or maybe gives you some kind of inspiration for another idea. So before jumping into it, I just want to show you guys some figures. Of course, you can see that these aren't the most updated figures. They're actually from April of last year. But I think the point of showing this is that it's as early as April. I guess April is really the onset of the pandemic. Schools are already closing. They're closing all around the world. And you can see on the statistic on the right, there's actually up to 1.6 billion students all over the world affected. So that's actually an astonishingly huge number. Wow, this number is rather depressing. I think the main reason I want to share this with everyone, to show you guys this, is to actually remind you that you're not alone. You're definitely not alone going through this. If you're struggling with any kind of stress or anxiety, or any issues coming up with brand new lesson plans, all your peers, all your fellow colleagues all around the world, not just within Indonesia, but all around the world, even in Singapore, all the teachers are experiencing the same problem, and you are not alone. So yeah, that's a very, very important thing to note. So on to the next thing, where since we spoke to so many schools, what are some things that we observe? So I think no doubt, I think definitely we've been hearing this term a lot, that COVID-19 is actually a digital accelerator, not just for the workplace, not for the office, but also for schools, for education. We also keep hearing this new term called the new normal being passed around, and it is true indeed that there's a new normal that is evident for schools now. Previously, I think maybe a year ago, what we were dealing with is what we thought is like a one-off school closures. But as we observe over the past year, schools can open, schools can close anytime. When the situation is dire, there's no choice. We have to keep our students safe. So obviously, we will have to close our schools. So there is a need for a new normal. We have to get used to this. Disruption has begun way before most of us are ready. This is true. I admit this, that even for some of us in Singapore, we're definitely not ready when it happened. So schools, teachers, and even parents, and of course parents actually, they are very important stakeholders. They are all adapting to change. And during this period, we definitely heard a lot of sentiments and fears. But I think one important thing to remind you guys again is that we actually also heard a lot of positives. So I think uh, at this point, usually I would ask the audience, what is one positive thing that you have observed in your school since the onset of COVID-19? But since we're doing this through Zoom, so it's a bit hard. But I guess it's really good for you to maybe take maybe just 10 seconds to think about, after all the trouble that you have went through in the past year, what is one positive thing that you have observed? So from my previous sessions, I've heard that uh, parents are being very very involved now in their children's education, because they are the number one contact point now. Since as a teacher you can't be beside them all the time, that's definitely one positive thing. I think another positive thing that I heard from some teachers is that schools now understand how hard teachers work and are providing as much resources as they could. I think previously sometimes teachers would be struggling with the school, trying to get more resources. Clearly now the schools are listening because they understand that these are times that require extra help. So I think before I move on to some positive things to that we have observed, this is just an example of like how each lockdown or how each pandemic has kind of shaped our teachers in Singapore. So this is actually a teacher in Singapore that actually went through SARS. So SARS was also very similar to COVID. It affected Singapore for almost, I think, 6 months, half a year. Maybe not to the extent of COVID, but it was so bad in Singapore that schools had to be closed at a moment, and that was back in 2003. And this teacher in Singapore actually was explaining how back then they don't even have WhatsApp. So how they did homework was that they actually this teacher actually went to each student's house to deliver homework. So it's really a very very different time. And now he was talking about how last year when schools were closed in Singapore, they have already prepared this kind of like a library or week-long revision package online that they can release anytime to the students just in case the schools close down the following day. So it's all about being prepared and preparedness, and I guess it's the thanks to technology, but also I guess being more resilient, and I guess that's one of the main points today. Now, in once again, continuing the note of positivity, I think here are some things that we positive things that we have heard. I think parents are now increasingly understanding of how tough the job of a teacher is. So that's that's a good thing. I think the notion of how we have done a certain things, it's also kind of off the window already. No more excuses because there's no choice. We have to change. Just simply this is something we simply can't say anymore. We can't say that this is how we always done things. No choice. Another thing is that we also actually interestingly realize that it's usually the teachers who are more concerned actually as compared to the students. I think during the past year, we saw how quickly students mastered technology required for classes. If you say that, hey, you need to use a new system, and it's really quick. Usually the students are the ones that are super fast to adapt. They're usually the ones that are ready for brand new change. Whereas teachers are, usually a bit hesitant, like, oh, I don't think we should try a new technology or whatnot. And I think this shouldn't be such a huge shock. The students are obviously at the age where their minds are constantly expanding, and they're definitely usually much more receptive to any new ideas or new things. But of course, that is not to say that all teachers are resistant or hesitant. This time we definitely saw a lot of teachers being really outstanding and experimental in their teaching. Some are actually trying to do science experiments at home also. Some are experimenting with video homework. I think we'll talk a little bit about this. And I think, when you think about it, it really does resonate with the students today, or maybe what is required of today, where everything is very multimedia. So video homework, it makes obvious sense, right? Why has it taken us so long for us to implement something like that? So nevertheless, despite the mention of all these positive things, the problems that come with COVID-19, they still exist. We recognize that, and they are definitely still substantial. So then the question then arises, how do we mitigate their problems and assimilate into this new normal that people speak of? So we'll keep this question at the back of our heads. But before that, we'll actually dive deeper into what home-based learning exactly is, something that we are all pushed into. So home-based learning, obviously, a key portion of the new normal. This is actually one of the definitions that we got from the Ministry of Education in Singapore. So whether your school is 10%, 50%, or 100% remote, most schools have to rely on home-based learning for effective social distancing. So what home-based learning is, as defined by the Singapore Ministry of Education, is that it's just a plan to help students learn from home. It can comprise of a mix of online and offline modes of learning. So they even listed out some examples. It could be e-learning, whether it's online assignments, online quizzes, or even live lessons, through video conferencing like Zoom. It can also be hard copy assignments. It doesn't have to be all online. We definitely we still recommend that students end up using their worksheets or doing looking through their textbooks, and they also listed out other activities. But still, understandably, this is definitely very different from your usual lesson. And teachers we work with usually lament about this a lot. They talk about how lesson preparation is completely different now, and it takes a lot more time. And it's understandable, I guess. Usually, an online lesson requires you make PowerPoint slides. It requires you to do online research and maybe test out the system first and all that. All that takes extra time. But remembering that there's always a silver lining, there's always something positive that comes with it. With any teaching method and learning format, there's always opportunities as much as there are issues. So today we'll talk more about the opportunities. Let's expand more of the opportunities than the issues. And I think at some point, as I'm speaking about home-based learning, some of you might actually find it very similar. It sounds very similar to something else. So some of you will say, hey, isn't this blended learning? So yeah, it's true. It sounds a lot like blended learning. This is simply because of how suitable blended learning is for home-based learning. But there is a very, very slight difference, or actually quite a huge difference, I would say, in my own opinion, which is that home-based learning is really just the circumstance that you're thrown in. It's something that just happened, something that you have to do. But blended learning, we should think about it as not something that we have to do, but instead, blended learning is actually a tool. It's like your hammer, it's your screwdriver. It's something that will help you. It's a tool that it's already kind of made perfectly already. It's optimized perfectly, just in case of circumstances where you have to do home-based learning. So I hope everyone is able to tell the difference between the two. And I think, thankfully, as much as home-based learning, we keep talking about how it's something brand new, it's a new normal, something that we're not used to. Thankfully, blended learning as a tool is extensively researched. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from existing blended learning examples. So it's so interesting. Blended learning is so extensively researched that is also at the same time highly contentious, in a way that there's actually a lot of different models, a lot of different definitions, and even different models. You have a lot of sub models even. So here I've listed out a few. It's very interesting. You have your outside inside learning, where I think back then, you have if you were having a classroom, maybe you would get your students to go out, and maybe if you wanted them to learn the characteristics of leaves or living things, for example. They go outside and they'll make observations, and then afterwards you'll come into classroom and you discuss with some guiding questions. Or maybe station rotation or lab rotations, both rather similar, where maybe you break the class into different groups, and instead of teaching, what you end up doing is that you give each group a problem set where they will struggle and try to solve the question themselves. As they are finishing up, they'll move on to another group, so they'll rotate. And I guess as a teacher, you move on to become a facilitator, where you just go around and just lift any barriers that the students have in their struggle. But ultimately, you do want the students to struggle themselves and arrive at the answer and the concept, the understanding of the concept themselves. Of course, we have heard of flipped classroom, where instead of the teacher teaching, maybe you get the students to, of course, flipped classroom could be another, a lot of different ways. One that I'm saying right now is that you get the different groups of students to do presentations, and students will learn from each other, peer learning. Or maybe, flipped classroom is where you get students to do the learning at home, and when you go back into the classroom, as a teacher, all you do is answer questions. Now, what now that you have learned this at home, what are the questions you have? Mastery-based and self-directed, I think those are they're quite straightforward. One is focused on the mastery of concepts, whereas self-directed is quite similar to what I mentioned about flipped classroom. So I guess as I'm explaining this last part of flipped classroom and self-directed, you notice that these submodels, they don't exist by themselves. They're not isolated circles. Actually, they can be amalgamated. So this is what I mean. Take, for example, you can have a flipped classroom that thrives on self-directed learning with the focus of achieving mastery. So this is the kind of format that you could have. First, you might have online content that will introduce the concepts. So you're giving the students maybe online videos, things for them to understand the concept. But at the same time, you don't ask them to watch the videos as is. You provide questions for them to look through and to answer as they're watching the videos. But when they get to class, when it's time for teacher-student, when it's time for contact time, it actually becomes either maybe a teacher-student consultation where the students will ask questions based on the guiding questions, or maybe you will have assessment instead. Now that the students come in, they watch the video, you give them a quick test, not for the sake of testing them, but for them to kind of consolidate what they have learned online. So there's just so many ways from this. You can see that even this permutation, you can switch it around a lot. And there's just so many ways to conduct blended learning. This is why it's usually pretty hard, for someone to jump in, and it's so hard to define what blended learning is sometimes. But nevertheless, there's actually one particular definition here that I saw in a research article that I really like this definition. It says here that the use of technology to combine in-class and out-of-class learning, maximizing the educational impact for students as well. So while at first glance, you might think it's like a kind of a run-of-the-mill definition of what blended learning is. I mean, obviously, right, using technology to combine in-class and out-of-class learning, wasn't that mentioned earlier? But what I really like is the part about when they talk about maximizing educational impact for students. So I think I'm kind of giving away a spoiler already for what I will be speaking about later when I talk about Marshall Cavendish's approach to blended learning. But isn't the focus of always on educational impact? Of course, right? It's always never about what model it is, never about what fancy technology that we have. It doesn't matter whether it is Google Classroom or whether is it WhatsApp. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we are able to maximize the educational impact for students. So I think that is really, really the most important, that when we try to go into blended learning, we don't think about what tools there are, or maybe what kind of technology you could use. It's always about, at the end of the day, are the students able to reach the learning outcomes that you have? Yeah. So ultimately, I did find this great video on defining blended learning, and I'm going to share it for everyone. We can just take a quick look at it, and this will really kind of consolidate what we have learned about blended learning. So once again, please give me a few seconds while I try to reshare my screen to see the video. You should be able to see the video. It's a quick 6-minute video, so let's take a look.
Blended learning is a way of teaching that combines online resources with in-person instruction to create a more personalized learning environment. With blended learning, instructors often make some or all of the content available to the students outside of class time. Taking this to the extreme, students could consume all of the traditional lecture material at home at their own pace, and during class time they could complete work assignments traditionally given as homework during class, as well as other activities like team-based or project-based learning. This describes the flipped classroom model, because it flips what students do at home and in the classroom. Typically, when a teacher creates a lecture, they have to make an educated guess about the knowledge level of their audience, since they have limited information about what each student knows or remembers. If a lecture is too difficult, then most of the students will be lost. If it's too easy, then most of the students will be bored. So teachers typically end up lecturing to the mythical middle of the class and hoping for the best. By putting their content online, students can move at their own pace. Those who are familiar with the material can go through it quickly, even watching it at an increased speed, while others who aren't as familiar with it can pause to take notes, re-watch it, or call up other resources to help them understand a concept being explained. An additional benefit for all students is that they can choose to engage with the material when they're most alert, which satisfies both the early bird and the night owl. And for those students that have disabilities, they can take the breaks that they need without having to worry about missing out or distracting others. Putting work assignments back in the classroom also has a number of benefits from a learning science perspective. A lot of students describe the frustration of feeling like they understand a concept in class, but then being confused when they go home and try to apply it to an assignment. This is also supported by research. We learn best through active work, not passive listening. Doing work assignments during class time means that teachers are available when students need them the most, when they're trying to apply their knowledge. Another place where students traditionally struggle is with out-of-class group work, because it can be hard to coordinate an in-person meetup as well as make sure those meetings are constructive. Moving group work into the classroom setting makes the logistics straightforward, and it also allows the instructor to keep an eye on group meetings and to help facilitate them if needed. An important aspect of all blended learning environments is that they're not intended to do away with face time in the classroom. Unlike online classes, where all of the material and interactions are online, blended classrooms count on face-to-face interactions between students and teachers. Instead of getting rid of these interactions, blended learning structures are intended to optimize them, moving the teacher from a passive sage on the stage, who delivers didactic lectures to a large audience, to a more active role as a guide on the side, who interacts one-on-one with students to help guide them in ways that might be impractical or impossible with a traditional teaching model. By doing this, blended learning classes move from a teacher-focused learning model to a student-focused learning model. In a traditional classroom, the approach is generally time-based, meaning the whole class moves at the same pace. All students get the same lesson on the same day, and are tested on that material at the same time. And then they all move on to the next topic regardless of their individual exam performance or if they have gaps in their knowledge. Blended classrooms are flexible enough to allow the use of a mastery-based model, which acknowledges that not all students are going to get the material at the same time. Some students might need more time to understand a topic, while at other times those same students will speed ahead. By giving students as much time as they need on a topic, and letting them decide when they're ready to be tested, blended classes can help to ensure that students move forward only when they've shown that they can apply what they've learned with confidence. Blended learning, though, like any teaching approach, brings with it some important challenges. Because this approach depends on technical resources, they have to be affordable, reliable, and easy to use for both the students and the teachers. Oftentimes, there's also a learning curve that has to be navigated, especially for those that have never used technology in the classroom. Another challenge is making sure that the materials are being reliably and independently consumed by the students, and they're coming to class prepared. This can be incentivized by closely tying in-class work assignments to the content that's being delivered online, and can often be tracked with learning platforms. Finally, one of the biggest challenges to blended learning is that it really changes the role of the teacher to that of a coach, and puts students in the driver's seat of their own learning, teaching them how to think as well as what to learn. This shift is an important one, and requires buy-in from both the teacher and the student to be successful. When it's done right, though, blended learning can lead to a much more enjoyable and effective learning experience for both parties. Alright, so as a quick recap, blended learning combines online resources with in-person instruction. And one type of blended learning is the flipped classroom, where students consume their lecture resources at home and spend class time doing in-class activities. This allows the teacher to change from a passive sage on the stage to a more active guide on the side, facilitating a student-focused learning model. Thanks for watching. You can help support us by donating.
So yeah, that's the video on blended learning, which I really like. I hope that is really helpful for defining what blended learning is for everyone. Yeah, so let's move on. So one last part, I guess, before we move into the meat of the presentation, which is the strategies, is that I just want to quickly talk about, what is Marshall Cavendish Education's approach to blended learning. Well, this is something that I alluded to earlier when I showed a definition of blended learning, which I really resonated with. Just now I was talking about how it's always about maximizing the learning outcomes, maximizing the educational impact as opposed to what tools. So similarly, one thing that we, even though we're doing blended learning for MCE, pedagogy doesn't ever go away. It doesn't go out the window. We spend so many years in education, and of course, most of them are in textbook publication. So we have an extensive research team, and we understand how important pedagogy is. Just because our media might be mostly digital now, it doesn't mean that we have to we forget about what makes a good lesson immediately. So in fact, you'll be surprised that the pedagogy of your typical traditional lessons still apply for digital blended lessons because the pedagogy is really the foundation. So for example, I guess if you're a science teacher in our audience today, and especially so if you're using our science books, you'll be familiar with the 5E instructional model here we have on the left here. We want the students to go through the process of engaging with the concept, subsequently exploring it further by themselves, and only afterwards we come in and explain, elaborate further, and eventually we evaluate students to ensure true mastery of the concepts. Likewise, a digital lesson, this model doesn't just go away. Instead, you should think about, what kind of digital tools do you want to engage your students with, or like what kind of digital tools can help you evaluate students and what level of mastery they are. The same thing goes for language teachers or math teachers. For example, those that are using our math books will be familiar with the concrete pictorial abstract model we have on the right. Yes, this is a very guided process that we have in our books, but that doesn't mean that we ignore it or like forget about it completely in our digital materials. We still try to follow this concrete pictorial abstract approach in our digital materials. Likewise, if you're a language teacher, we still want to go through. I guess if we're in class, we'll still go through a warm up process, afterwards presentation and practice, a little bit of personalization and extension, and of course you'll wrap up the lesson. When we go digital, that doesn't mean we forget about that immediately. It's about how do we do this digitally. So apart from pedagogy, we also contend that's really very important to always ask the right questions, when you're planning your blended lesson. Here are some questions we have, for example, what are you trying to achieve? What are your requirements? What are your students struggling with? Here I have some answers. Maybe you're just trying to teach shadows today, and you have to cover it within 2 periods. Or maybe you have a mix of strong and weak students. So thinking about that will already start to help you plan your lesson already, as opposed to planning your lesson first and then try to fit it in with your students. Another few questions here, for example, what concepts or learning outcomes do you have to cover? And also, I think arguably the most important question is always, you may have the best ideas, but what resources do you have to carry them out? So by assessing your resources, only by assessing your resources, I mean, your wheels, the wheels in your brain, should immediately start churning, and the ideas should just come naturally to you. You don't have to think about, what kind of model it is, like whether you want to do lab rotation or flipped classroom. You don't have to think about that. In fact, once you start thinking about your students' needs and like the tools that you have, the lesson plan comes very, very natural to you. So obviously, with the lack of time that you have to make use of what you already have. So for example, let's say you're a user of My Pals Are Here Science. That means you already have access to our lesson plans and PowerPoint slides on our learning management system, on our LMS, MC Edu Hub. So from there, you have all these lesson plans that, although they are designed for a traditional classroom, you can easily build on it or adapt it for a blended learning class. So once again, these are just some guiding questions. This is not all the questions that you might have in your head. But when you start thinking about these questions, you do not need to find out what model to use anymore. Instead, the best model will come to you naturally when you ask these questions. So, what our solution is MC Edu Hub. So let me just change my slides. Hold on for a bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, so our solution is MC Edu Hub. So I have 4 strategies to share with everyone today. So let's start off with the first one. Finally, we reached the strategies and tips. So strategy number 1, here I have rely on visual formats to keep engaging your students. There's so many ways to use visual formats nowadays. There's so many multimedia resources online. Interactive videos can obviously be used as pre-class teasers to save your classroom time. Perhaps you want to get your students to watch some of these videos before class, and it will save you a lot of time to explain the concept or to engage them. And in class, you can just jump straight into the complex stuff. Or maybe, you're dealing with a particularly complex concept. No matter how you reteach your students, they just don't understand. And you can start using these kind of videos to help you explain a complex concept. For MCE here, we really understand how visualization can help build students' understanding of a concept. So likewise, it's really, really useful. So engagements are a great way to get your students to, either, if you're teaching English and, your students are at home, and they're probably speaking Bahasa with their family, having these engaging videos will help your students switch into maybe the English language when they're doing English when they're doing English lessons. Or maybe, they're just at home playing games and that kind of stuff, and you immediately want to switch them into thinking scientifically or thinking mathematically. Watching these videos will definitely calm them down and immediately switch into the learning mode. So it's a very nice transition kind of way. So we actually have a few engaging videos on MC Edu Hub. So I'm going to actually switch my screen once again and really, really quickly and just show you guys one of these videos. So let's just take a look at the video together and I'll explain further.
It's so dark in here. I'm scared.
Don't be afraid. I'll switch on my torchlight.
Is that a bird? How did the bird get in here?
No, that's not a real bird. It's the shadow of my hands. When my hands block the light from the torchlight, a shadow is formed.
I see. The shadow is moving.
Yes, the shadow moves as the torchlight moves, but it will always be on the opposite side of the torchlight. In fact, the shadow can change its size or shape depending on the position of my hands. See? A shadow is an area of darkness formed when light is totally or partially blocked. The shadow can change its size or shape depending on the position of the object that is blocking the light.
So this is actually one of the many videos that we have on MC Edu Hub under our Science Digital Suite. So immediately, I think you can see how relevant this video is and how pedagogically sound it is. I think immediately you will notice how we don't immediately jump into definitions, or we don't immediately jump into concepts of what a shadow is or what the different variables are. Instead, we have these two cute little aliens. They're having a little bit of a banter. They're talking about, how did a bird get in here? Oh, it's actually a shadow. And they talk about, how a shadow is formed, so on and so forth. So that's what we ultimately prefer to start off our science lessons, by engaging students first and not throwing definitions at them. Instead, we want them to start thinking in their head and reaching that understanding of a concept by themselves. And only afterwards, towards the end, do we consolidate what they're learning. We consolidate with a definition, and for them to register and really to register what they understand about shadows and its variables, or changing its shape, and so on and so forth. So immediately, I'm sure obviously there's a lot of different kind of ways you can use this. Whether you want to get your students to watch these videos by themselves before they attend your class, be it online class or in-person class, or maybe you want maybe the students are particularly struggling with shadows, and this is something that you can definitely play in class to get the class warm up or to transit into the topic of shadows. So the possibilities are really quite endless here. So switching back to my PowerPoint slides, give me a second here. So yeah, that is a sample video from our MC Edu Hub. But what about maybe if you want to film your own? So I have some examples actually of teachers in Singapore filming TikToks, which are literally quite bite-sized videos to help your students remember exam tips or concepts. And I think this is actually really interesting. I guess going back to how teachers in Indonesia are using WhatsApp to conduct their classes, right? So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, what tool it is, as long as it is the tool that your students know how to use, or they are able to be reaching. You're able to reach your students, and obviously, I'm sure a lot of your students are on TikTok at the moment. So if it's possible to get to your students, I'm sure then in that way it is a worthy learning method. So I think I have two videos here, but maybe I'll show the one on the right, which is quite interesting. This math teacher in Singapore, actually created a dance based on the different graph shapes. So of course, the TikTok video is less than 1 minute. So let's just take a quick look. So yeah, this is really interesting. Definitely, of course, you don't have to do something like that, but I hope it gives you inspiration. I mean, if you don't want to do something like that, you could get your students to do something like that. So I guess, yeah, maybe video homework to consider for a little bit later. But apart from that, yeah, another visual format that definitely would engage your students a lot is this thing called interactive virtual manipulative. So this is something that I think would be quite exclusive to Marshall and to MC Edu Hub. What these tools is that these are actually virtual tools that actually help you convey your concepts even better. So I'm going to switch again to MC Edu Hub really quickly. So I guess this is something that's something that you have to get used to, switching screens and all that. But honestly, if this is out of, in the grand scheme of things, it's something really tiny to worry about. But here we have an example of what the interactive virtual manipulative is. So essentially, it just looks like an illustration that you can see in your textbook or maybe on your PowerPoint slides. But what's special about this is that it's actually interactive. So here I have a light source, a torchlight, obviously, a object, and a shadow that's eventually formed. And what I can do is actually I can move the torchlight back and forth. And for us as adults, we might think that, okay, this is pretty normal. I guess, yeah, this will help with my teaching. But for a student, this is actually really, really powerful. For someone maybe 10 years old, what they're saying is that they're making connections in their head. They're realizing that, oh, okay, as I bring the torchlight closer to the object, what happens? The shadow becomes larger. If I move it further back, oh, the shadow becomes smaller. They're actually the connections, the neurons in their head, they're making that connection in their head and they're registering that fact. So this is how powerful visual methods can be. As students are able to see the variables happen in real life and make and register that in class. So it's no longer about maybe looking at the textbook and memorizing, oh, if a light source goes closer to an object, shadow becomes larger. No, it's actually really understanding what is happening. And so no matter what in your exams or whatever, no matter how the situation is switched around, the student will be able to answer the question because they didn't memorize and regurgitate. Instead, they truly understood the concept. So this is really the power of interactive virtual manipulatives. So for example, maybe I switch to a ball and as a student, I'll understand, oh, okay, no matter what, no matter where the light source is facing, the shadow, the eventual shadow is circular. But if it's a pyramid, and I'll understand, oh, that's weird. Like, isn't a pyramid a triangle? How come the shadow is a square? Then I'll realize, oh, it's always about where the light source is facing. If it's facing the top, the eventual shadow is actually a square. So these are really powerful tools for your students to kind of really register and understand the concepts from the foundation, as opposed to just understanding roughly and then memorizing the rest of it. So yeah, very powerful tools. Okay, going back to my PowerPoint slides. So yeah, that is strategy number one. Moving on, I think strategy number two is really interesting also, and I kind of hinted it earlier constantly, is that you can try different ways to assess your students. So obviously, this is not just about because of the tools you have. You have no choice or whatever, but it's also about developing skills in students in the future, right? We're always talking about future ready skills, and we have to think about whether just doing homework on a piece of paper, is that what is required of the future, or is there so many different skills that you need your students to have to be future ready? So here I have one example, which is video homework, which is something that teachers in Singapore they're trying out, which is quite successful actually. You can do this in a lot of different ways. One, you can have student presentations through Zoom. Getting students to present topics or maybe a simple show and tell through Zoom. Or you can even get students to maybe film science experiments using household ingredients, of course, nothing too dangerous. It's really a great extension and personalization activity, and also a chance to get students to articulate in class. I think one struggle with online learning, for sure, is that students are not speaking up. This is definitely a common complaint that teachers have, that students are not speaking up. So having things like video homework will ensure that they are still articulating, they're still speaking, and they're still working on that in class. So yeah, that's an example of a video homework that these are different examples of video homework you can do. Obviously, earlier on I thought about TikTok and how you can make it a little bit more creative. That is definitely possible. Actually, one example just came to mind where I've seen students, reenact events in history on TikTok in that 1 minute. So I think that's a very good way of getting our students to summarize very content-dense topics, like geography, history, or maybe even science, to kind of help them, really understand, to help them memorize also. Another way of different ways of assessment is that you can try different differentiated assessments. So once again, this is also quite specific to MC Edu Hub. We actually have very interesting ways of assessing students there. You have things like your question bank, and where if you sign up with certain kind of products that we do have thousands and thousands of questions. And what I really like about those questions is that, one, they're auto graded. So it means that some of those questions, like as students do them, they immediately get the answer. Not just that, but provided step-by-step solutions, so they can immediately see where they went wrong. Another fact that I really like about it is that, especially for math, it's actually mapped according to different levels for weaker students, for your stronger students, and for most of your students. So you have your level 1, level 2, level 3 questions. And especially in a classroom where you might have a mixture of strong students and weak students, you can give them different questions. Give the strong students tougher questions to challenge them, to keep them interested in class. And for the weaker students, give them questions for them to work on their foundation and to build their confidence. So yeah, that's a lot of different kinds of ways of assessing students. Of course, we also have this thing called Apply Plus that is in some of our learning suites, our science digital suite and our math digital suite, which it's also very highly visual. So yeah, I won't belabor the point since I showed a few examples earlier. But another way of assessing your students differently is definitely and I think this is very, very relevant for building future readiness, which is web links and information literacy. So at this point of time in the world, there's so much information out there. There's so much text, information, videos, and all that available online. It's just the nature of the information world right now. And what better way to sharpen your students' information comprehension skills while picking up concepts is to get them to go online, or maybe you can provide them a web link and give them a few guiding questions that they can just go through it and sieve out information that they need. There's obviously so much information online, and what better way is to go in and to sieve out the information that you need and answer questions to pick up the concept. So obviously, how MC Edu Hub can help with this is definitely you can definitely create your own quizzes and get and submit it and send them to students to have them do the quiz alongside the web link that you have provided. So yeah, that is I covered a few different ways to assess your students. So definitely do try different ways, and not just the typical pen and paper way. So my third strategy, my second to last one, is that gamification works. I think this is something that's maybe some of you all are already aware because you're trying out different tools. For example, here I have something like Kahoot. And wow, like I just remember every time I sit in the class with Kahoot, and it's always a riot. Students are suddenly engaged. The students get really competitive immediately. It's really, really funny. I think for those who are not familiar with what Kahoot is that it's kind of like a quiz, but what's interesting about it is that it's live. So all the students will do the quiz at the same time, and there's actually a live tally of who's getting a higher score than the other. And of course, students get really, really excited. Kahoot does this really funny thing where they play this intense music, and I mean, while you might think that it's just a game or it's very distractive for students, it's actually a very powerful way of engaging the class. You have a class that might be tired, especially if they're sitting in front of a computer for maybe 8 hours a day. It's really something special to kind of change their mood a bit and get them interested in the class again. So definitely do consider things like that. Another way of pushing your video call further is that I actually learned this from a language teacher, which is that they are actually doing scavenger hunts online. So how does that work, right? So for example, everyone will have the textbook in front of them, and the teacher would say maybe a particular word, maybe like a new word like assistance or something. And the students will go into the textbook and try to find the word as soon as possible, and they will try to bring out their textbook and show the teacher that, oh, I found it. And the last usually the last student will have to kind of form a sentence with the word, so on and so forth. So once again, I think really, really flexible also. You can use this to engage your class in the beginning, or it's actually quite a nice wrap up if you think about it. Wrapping up the class this way would kind of help students retain what they have learned across the class if you are choosing words that are relevant. And I think if you want to push this further, of course, this doesn't have to just be a language teacher thing. I can immediately think about, math, your math class. For example, if you want to introduce the topic of angles, and I think in our My Pals Are Here textbooks, there are always this really beautiful chapter openers talking about, what angles are, you can see them all over the world, so and so forth. And now I guess students don't really have a chance to go out and to see those things either. So what would be really interesting is that maybe as a teacher, you say, okay, class, now find something in your room or in your house that has a right angle, and all the students will go run around your house, find something with a right angle, and they'll bring it up on screen, and oh, this is a right angle. And then of course some students will be wrong, some students will be right, and it's a good chance for you to correct the students that are wrong and to understand, who understands the concept and who doesn't, in a very, very fun way. So yeah, that's definitely one of the really very powerful ways to kind of gamification is definitely one of the very, very powerful ways to kind of really push your lesson. Of course, apart from that, we also do have a lot of mini games that's on MC Edu Hub. So definitely do contact us for a demo of these things if you are interested. And last but not least, strategy 4 is that always remember to wrap up the lesson. So I think this is kind of more an emphasis on something that teachers usually forget to do as they move on to digital. Harping on the point again, once again, that pedagogy is still the bread and butter of education. It is very, very important to review and consolidate your learning. After you work so hard, you plan all these activities, you created games, you even made PowerPoint slides using the PowerPoint slides that's available on EduHub. You work so hard already, but if you don't consolidate the lesson, which is something that we usually forget to do because time is running out, and if you forget to do that, students don't exactly consolidate what they have learned for the day, and it's really quite a waste. And of course, that is something that we took note at Marshall Cavendish. So in our digital activities, you can see that for sometimes we have these interactive mind maps to kind of end the lesson really powerfully, and these mind maps are also fully narrated. So students can definitely go back and refer to it, and even learn ensure that they get the right pronunciation. We also have quick quizzes at the end of the lesson to kind of also once again wrap up. But what's another way of wrapping up? I think this is one of my last strategies, is that it doesn't always have to be a review like we saw earlier. It doesn't have to be a mind map. It doesn't have to be a quiz. It can be much more active. It doesn't have to be as passive as we think. So this is also something that's on MC Edu Hub that you can try doing. Of course, if you want to do it on WhatsApp or whatnot, you could do it. Is that you can definitely use your social learning wall to do reflections. So this is something that I saw a language teacher do, is that this game is called plate, fridge, or dustbin. So you as a teacher, you can say choose 5 words from this particular unit that we just went through. That you want to plate. 5 words that you want to plate, meaning you want to use immediately. If it's on your plate, you want to eat immediately, right? You don't want to keep it or whatever. So words that you like to use immediately. And B, words that you think you'll use later, so you put it in the fridge. Or C, words that you don't want to keep, you think that they're not really relevant, so you throw them in the dustbin. And then afterwards, you can even ask the students, okay, write a story with the 5 words based on the words that you want to plate. So what was the point of this activity? So actually research actually shows that students need to see a word, they have to actually visually see the word for 15 to 20 times before they actually do remember it, before they actually register it. So this is quite scary, right? You think about all the times that maybe you introduce a word to a student, but the likelihood of them encountering the word again is very, very limited. And especially if they don't read as much, that will even reduce the amount of chances for them to remember the word. So most of the time, words are usually encountered only a handful of times. So this activity can actually help students recycle the words from the lesson or the unit. And so they'll use the words more often. And also by giving them a personal choice about what they want to plate, what they want to fridge, or what they want to throw in the dustbin, it actually gives them an element of critical thinking. Because the students will need to think about what words will actually help them in life, actually. Or what words will help them complete the story that they have to write right now. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting way to consolidate a lesson. And it's much more active also I think sometimes consolidation, sometimes teachers don't think that consolidation works because they think that, the students aren't listening anyway. It's the last 10 minutes of the lesson. The student just wants to go home or go on to another class, or maybe if they're at home, they just want to go on and play with their brother or their sister. But with something like that, there's something much more active. The student has kind of, in a way, no choice but to partake. And as they're doing this actively, as opposed to passively, they are able to consolidate and really bury deep down, even and register what is taught in the class. So yeah, that is my last strategy. So before that, of course, we have to review. Out of all these strategies, as you come with your lesson plans and all that, always try to think about if you were able to do the following. Whether you have able to follow the pedagogy. Here we have the 5E instructional model, or maybe the language learning model. Are you able to follow through it? And I can confidently say that of all the strategies that I mentioned today, all of them do fit into the model and are all pedagogically sound. So what do these strategies have in common? I think one thing, going back to the definition of blended learning that we talk about, how educational impact is more important than what tool you use. Here I've written down purpose is always more important than tool. It's true, we always thought about what we're trying to achieve before anything else. And I think that really helps us stay on our objective of providing maximum educational impact. Another thing is that these tools today that I talked about is all easily implementable. And I think that's one of the most important things. There's no need to go for training or as teachers, you don't have to do a lot of research to use. They're just all digital versions of what we know, or just social media. Even MC EduHub, what you saw today, they're just videos, right? I mean, we all use YouTube. It's very easy to just click play. Or maybe the social learning wall, it's really kind of just like Facebook. So it's really very, very simple. As teachers, you don't have to relearn too much. And as students, it's something that is second nature to them already. So very, very naturally, I think what's most important is that, you want to do your teaching. You don't want to waste too much time doing other things. So what is most important is that it is easily implementable. So yeah, I guess before I wrap up, is that I just have a few tips to share with everyone. Which is, the first tip is that physical environment is very important. I think having a great lesson plan, having a great lesson is only half the battle won. I think at the end of the day, your student also needs to have a conducive learning environment, and this also applies to teachers. So I understand that it doesn't it's not like every student is privileged enough to have their own study room and all that. I totally understand that. But I think it will be really, really helpful if ultimately students and parents they decide exactly which area at their home is for learning, and which area is for playing, and which area is for resting. So for example, maybe in the day, if the dining table is where the student will do the homework, then that is decided that will be their learning their learning environment for the day. They shouldn't be going to the bedroom, they shouldn't be going outside at all. It's the dining room is where they will learn. And that will really, really ensure conducive environment. And of course, to belabor the point, it's not just the students, also for you. I'm sure it will help you out if you have a designated place where you will do your teaching, as opposed to multiple areas of the house, so that when you rest, you are truly able to rest without thinking about work. I think I have also a few extra considerations for a lesson. I think as you plan your lessons, you may use the strategies and all that. You may try to follow the pedagogy, ask yourself those questions. But here are some questions that could also help. You can always think about whether it's interesting, whether is it active, as opposed to passive. Is it scaffolded? Are you jumping straight into a very complex concept, or is it actually nicely built up where your students are able to enter at a very approachable entry point, and as you ramp up to the complexity of the concepts, it will be much more comfortable for them. And is it meaningful? I think sometimes, of course, for language teachers, or maybe for science or math teachers, we think about delivering concepts. We just want to deliver concepts. But if you could actually add that extra element of meaningfulness, whether it helps them in the future, whether it's a future-ready kind of approach to your the delivery or the lesson, or maybe, for example, you're delivering something that's relevant right now to help them understand the world better. that's always a bonus. And I think my last point, and I think it's actually maybe the most important, is that, at the end of the day, try to be really kind to yourself. I think this period is definitely very confusing for a lot of us, teachers, schools, parents, and even the students. So no point beating yourself up over any kind of hiccups. You are learning during this period also, and so are we. Even at Marshall Cavendish Education, as we speak to different teachers, we are learning about all the different ways to do things. Believe me when I say this, that this presentation on strategies have evolved every time I've spoken to a new crowd of teachers. So yeah, there's always learning to do. So ultimately, do be kind to each other and to yourself, and let's support each other. So yeah, that's actually the end of my sharing on strategies for blended learning and home-based learning. So yeah, I'll probably hand my time back, and we could maybe do a few question and answers.
Yeah. Amazing, Darian. Thank you very much for your sharing. Very interesting. There are a few things that I like to you to elaborate. Like that scavenger hunt. That's a quite interesting concept. Can you tell us more on that? How to do that? Maybe in a different subjects, or how, and maybe also for like older kids, like secondary school, like junior college. What kind of things that we can do.
Right. So interestingly enough, this scavenger hunt idea actually came from a Chinese language teacher in Singapore. So what she was doing is that she was actually teaching primary school students, and I guess with language learning, especially Chinese is kind of more like a second language for the students here in Singapore. So I guess with second language, uh, it's harder for students to kind of memorize a lot of different new words and vocabulary. So I think going back to the point about how we want the students to see the words constantly. So what this teacher decided to do is that as she introduced new words, she wants the students to quickly look through the words on their textbook and to find the word and to show the rest of the class. So in a way, there are two benefits from this, right? The students get very competitive. It's very funny when all the students in the class get very competitive, but that's also good because they're engaged. And the second thing is that it's about reciting the words, right? They'll keep seeing the word and they will remember the word, which is very, very important in second language kind of learning. So that's I guess one way to do it um, that's one of the ways to do it for language learning. I think definitely applicable to English language and so on and so forth. For other subjects, I think definitely the example I mentioned for math earlier about maybe looking for angles, so on and so forth. But for older students, for the ones in junior college or maybe the ones in secondary school, maybe the scavenger hunt can be kind of upgraded instead of something that's on your textbook. They might find it kind of, as teenagers, they'll say, oh, it's very lame or whatever. But definitely there's a chance to upgrade it. Maybe, ask them to search for something online. You can think about, this actually helps them build up their future ready skills, also their information literacy skills as they're looking for things online. They're learning, what to sieve out. There's so much information online. As they're looking through, the internet, they'll be able to decipher, what is important or what's the relevant concept. So immediately I can think about a teacher asking, what is maybe this process of the water cycle, or what is this planet, and how many planets are there in the solar system, that sort of questions. And maybe the students can go online to search, and the first student to answer gets a point from the teacher, something like that.
Okay, interesting. One more thing that also interests me is using web links for assessment. Can you elaborate on that as well? And like that's, I think that's really beneficial, since like right now the information, like you said, like too many information. It's not, the problem is we have too many information, and of course a lot of the information are actually fake news, like hoaxes, like then how we can implement this, like in the teaching and learning process.
Yeah, definitely. So, definitely with web links, of course, the kind of options out there, there's so many. You can give your students maybe an article that is on a more reputable website, maybe National Geographic or something, where all the information will be accurate. But of course, you can also challenge your students by giving them an article that is maybe from a shadier website or anything like that. But
Hmm.
either reputable or suspicious, the most important thing is to always provide guiding questions along with the article. So it will guide your students to understand, to pick out, what is important. You can ask questions like, do you think the author, why do you think the author is biased, or like, do you think the author is biased? And this will, get the students to think about, oh, okay, so I can't take this entire article as wholesale. I need to read and understand, what are the indicators that this might be fake news, or what are the indicators that this might be real. Um, and those are the skills that we want students to develop, right?
Right.
We don't just receive information as if, that we are able to receive the information, sift through it, and decide whether this is reputable or not.
Okay. Thank you. Bapak Ibu sekalian, silakan kalau Anda ada hal-hal yang ingin ditanyakan ke Darian, bisa ketik pertanyaannya di kolom chat di YouTube. Sebutkan Anda dari mana, nama dan pertanyaannya apa, nanti akan saya sampaikan ke Darian. Bisa dengan menggunakan bahasa Indonesia, nanti akan saya alih bahasa ke bahasa Inggris. Dan juga jangan lupa untuk subscribe channel Pendidikan Fox Point ini, kemudian like videonya, share ke teman-teman yang membutuhkan, dan berikan komentarnya. Dan saat ini memang daftar hadir belum dibuka. Kita akan fokus dulu ke materi, nanti akan diberikan infonya kapan daftar hadir akan dibuka. Jadi simak terus acara ini sampai selesai. Okay, Darian, I'm asking the audience to send some questions if they would like. But one of the things that it's a problem here in Indonesia is actually internet access, bandwidth, and I believe in other, of course, not Singapore. Singapore is the bandwidth, the access is everywhere. But like countries like Indonesia, maybe Philippines, very difficult to have access to internet. Any tips, any suggestion how we can do this, home-based learning as effective as possible when we actually have a very limited internet access or bandwidth? Maybe something that you have heard from other countries, from your partners.
I think, admittedly, this is quite a tough question, but and it's definitely something that schools will have to navigate. But I think one factor that would really help navigate this is that, while a lot of the materials are online, definitely do make the resources try to make the resources downloadable, so that when the student has access, they can immediately download everything. So that they can immediately use it. Like, for example, in MC Edu Hub, there are quite a few things that can be made offline. And like, for example, the quizzes or maybe the slides that you can immediately download, that after you download, you can turn off the access. So that is definitely one thing that I would recommend. That definitely something that's purely online might be quite dangerous. Yeah.
Okay. How about limiting the video call or video conference, lectures or meetings? Would that work? So we do, like really pushing both synchronous and asynchronous learning, and more on the asynchronous. Would that be,
Yeah.
something that we can do here?
I think that's definitely the power of blended learning, where you kind of really empower your students to kind of, because of obviously that the contact time, the video conferencing time is very, very precious. So if you are able to empower your students to do the learning themselves by providing them the appropriate questions or the appropriate kind of steps that they have to take in order to digest the content themselves. So when it comes to class time is much more precious, where you focus on, just ensuring that any kind of doubts that your student has, you can immediately answer those doubts as opposed to taking the time to lecture. That will be really, really powerful. So I think, definitely blended learning with the focus of like self-directed learning by the students, that would definitely ensure that the time that students actually get internet access, that will be very precious and used adequately.
Okay, thank you. Here's one question, Darian, from Eko Indarto. His question is, in July, mid-July, our government is pushing to have to open the school, but only limited students coming to the schools. Maximum only 25% coming to the schools, and in one day, maximum only 2 hours of meeting, and then maximum only twice a week. That's the plan of our government. Any suggestion on how to make the best of that?
I think it's quite similar to the question of like internet access. This means that the contact hours, the 2 hours, is very, very, very important. So that 2 hours is really about making sure that for the students, you can immediately clear any doubts that they have. Otherwise, there's a lot of preparation work on the teachers end. Definitely, you need to ensure that you're able to prepare home packages for the students that they can do at home without any issues, that they can just obviously go through themselves and not require too much contact time. But I think, of course, unfortunately, it's also about ensuring that the teacher is always available to answer any questions if the students are still at home. So that is definitely something that that they have to manage. But otherwise, it's just about recognizing that 2 hours is a very important resource, and don't spend time on introducing or teaching concepts, but it's about like zoning into what kind of gaps that the student has after learning the concept by themselves.
Can you give how to implement that? Like an example on how not to focus on the teaching concept, but like what you said.
So for example, maybe the teaching of concepts, maybe the teacher might want to video record themselves teaching the concept so that the students can watch at home.
Okay.
And then when it comes to class time, it's really just about answering questions,
Okay.
that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jadi Pak Eko Indarto, penjelasan dari Darian tadi, yang 2 jam itu lebih fokus ke komunikasi, bagaimana anak bertanya. Jadi bukan ke ngajarnya kan gitu. Nah, ngajarnya itu bisa yang lebih banyak kita lakukan dengan cara asinkronus kan gitu. Misalnya tadi Darian mengatakan penjelasan direkam aja videonya dan letakkan di, misalnya kalau sekolah menggunakan Office 365 atau G Suite kan gitu, bisa diletakkan di sana dan itu diakses buat siswa mengakses materinya. Tapi pertemuan itu gunakan untuk lebih banyak mereka bertanya, berdialog dengan guru. Gitu. Okay, next question from Hedwig Maria. The question is visual format is to have the students engage to the lesson, but each student has their own interests. What should we do? As in our our school, one class contains about 30 students.
Yeah, so that's a really good question about different interests. That sometimes it's not just about different levels, but also different interests. So I think going back to the fact that for example, like a tool like MC Edu Hub, you are able to actually give assign different resources to different students. So earlier on, the example that I gave is that weaker students will probably give them easier questions, and stronger students will give them tougher questions to stimulate them. Likewise, for different interests, for maybe web links, if you're doing web links or doing video homework, you can definitely assign students different things to for them to work on. And I think that is actually an even better idea if you have students working on different topics, and maybe when it's time for online class, they are sharing with the rest of the class. So it's a chance for different students to learn from each other about their different interests also. So yeah, definitely cater to the students' different interests.
Okay. Well, what do you think of project-based learning? Would that be a best way to actually cater all those different interests of the student?
Yeah, that definitely. Projects are definitely a great way to get students to collaborate with each other also, which is also a very important skill that they'll need. So yeah, definitely collaborating, and afterwards that sharing with each other what they have worked on.
Hmm. You mentioned a few times about MC Edu Hub, and you show a little bit of it. Can you show again how it looks like? Like what are the things that maybe Indonesian teachers can use? Uh, is that possible?
Yeah, sure. So just give me maybe 10 seconds while this loads the MC Edu Hub. But
Okay.
what MC Edu Hub is essentially basically our learning management system. So
Okay.
what I think what we like to explain it is that it's almost like a Netflix for education. So sorry, I'm just trying to log in and to show everyone. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna share my screen right now. So as I log in, you will immediately see that, wow, I have a lot of content here. It's really almost like a Netflix for education. But of course, it also depends on what your school decides to subscribe to. So here I have everything because I'm using the admin account for Marshall Cavendish. But the content is really quite impressive. It goes from math to science to some to English language to some Mandarin language also, and also coding and coding programs and so on and so forth. So it's really very expensive. So we have different things like ebooks that you see here, but also specifically digital content like what we saw earlier just now. So what I saw, what I showed you guys earlier was the science and some of the English, but maybe I can open one of the math, and you could see how everything will be mapped according to subtopics. Here, maybe I'll go into fractions, and then you can see, oh, there's all the different kind of subtopics, and very simple. There's discover and there's apply. Very straightforward. Now, apart from all this content, I was speaking earlier about some of the tools. You can create your own lesson, you can create your own test, which is really useful. And you can even go for we have a social learning wall here, where students are speaking earlier about, maybe you can have reflections as a wrap up, and you can easily have that here also. Yeah, and it's taking a while to load. Otherwise, you can definitely, as teachers, you can look at the reports also. So for example, you can look at when the students are logging in, like their usage report. That will be helpful in maybe determining whether your students are logging in. Try to look for a class that I can show an example. Yeah, but because my account is not a real school, so no one has logged in. Very bad, but yeah, you can see I can see that, oh, student 10 hasn't logged in, so on and so forth. So that's really very useful. Apart from logging in, of course, the mastery reports, that's the most important, right? We want to see whether students actually understood the concepts. So I can actually go to all the different classes, and I can see, okay, for class 1A, I can see that, oh, this student has completed 25% of science assessment grade 1 topics. So the reporting function is really very, very powerful also. So I guess that is what MC Edu Hub is. It's a 360 kind of a solution where you have all this amazing content, not just content, but also tools like lesson builder, test builder, to help you with your, to facilitate your teaching. And ultimately, everything there's a feedback loop through the reports. So it's a very, very powerful 360 solution. So yeah.
So, are you saying that schools need to have this learning management system, something like MC Edu Hub, in order to do this whether home base or even like going to school, we need to have these tools?
I would say that it will obviously help a lot, and of course, I do recommend that that schools will like take up a solution like this. It will really, really help a lot.
Okay. Are there any schools in Indonesia using this solution from MC Edu Hub already?
Yeah, quite a few actually. I have my country head of Indonesia in the call with us actually. Maybe Bernard, you are able to share the kind of data or feedback or testimonials from schools in Indonesia. Bernard?
Yeah, he's offline maybe.
Oh, yeah. So I don't have the data with me immediately because
Okay.
I spoke with quite a few countries, but when yeah.
Hi,
Okay.
Oh yeah, he's
hi.
online.
Yeah, sorry, because I
Hey.
was mute just now. Okay, we have schools like, for example, Bina Bansa. They are actually subscribing our MC Edu Hub in, for example, like our mathematics and sciences as well. So we also have like English, which actually cater for the skill-based learning as well. Yeah, this is one of the chain school that I can suggest. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Thanks, Bernard.
no problem.
Ya. Bapak Ibu sekalian, ini juga sekaligus menjawab pertanyaan Bu Lydia Kirana dari SDK 6 BPK. Tadi sudah dijelaskan salah satu metode yang pas di era ini adalah project based learning. Itu bisa dimanfaatkan supaya juga minat siswa, bakat siswa juga kita bisa menjangkau itu semua kan begitu. Kemudian tentunya di era yang modern ini kita juga membutuhkan alat bantu. Dan salah satu alat bantu yang paling pas era pembelajaran abad 21 ini memang sekolah juga menggunakan yang namanya learning management system. Nah, learning management system itu ada yang seperti contoh ini yang ditunjukkan oleh Darian nih dari MC Edu Hub. Tapi itu akan sangat membantu karena apa? Tadi contoh ya, kalau kita hanya punya 2 jam di sekolah untuk proses tatap mukanya, kalau kita pakai untuk menjelaskan, waktunya nggak akan cukup. Nah, jadi yang dipakai misalnya kita membuat video tentang menjelaskan konsep tersebut, kita letakkan di learning management system, dan di learning management system ini bisa kita lihat siapa siswa yang mengakses video tersebut, berapa lama, kapan, itu ada laporannya kan begitu. Jadi kita bisa melihat siapa yang belajar, siapa yang tidak. Nah, di sekolah kita pakai untuk lebih ke diskusi, tanya jawab, gitu, hal-hal yang kurang dipahami siswa tapi tidak menjelaskan konsep. Jadi kurang lebih seperti itu Bapak Ibu tentang bagaimana kita bisa melaksanakan pembelajaran di era pandemi yang seefektif mungkin. Anything else you like to share, Darian? Maybe some experience from countries outside Singapore that you've seen quite interesting, and that maybe we can share to the audience. Anything that you can share?
I think maybe nothing specific. I think what I'm hearing about what's going to happen in a few weeks, that you guys only have 2 hours with students. I understand that that is very, very daunting in a way. But I guess all I could say is that just try your best. I'm sure the parents will also help you out. I understand that you have very little time with the students, and I'm sure the parents will also definitely understand that and will also try to help you out along the way. I think what we notice is that yes, teachers across the world they do have much lesser time with the students, even in Singapore when schools are closed also. But I guess at the end of the day, students do realize that okay, things are changing, so they can't rely too much on the teachers, and so yeah, don't be too I guess don't be too afraid. Just try your best. Is all I'm saying.
Oke. Bapak Ibu sekalian, jangan takut mencoba. Dan gitu. Jadi memang ini hal yang baru buat kita semua. Ya kita akan mencari, nggak ada kunci jawabannya ini. Kita akan mencari yang paling pas untuk peserta didik kita tentunya. Darian, there is another question from Hedwig Maria. Many teachers feel that online teaching is not effective, for they cannot control the students well. They basically, like turn off the camera, mute the microphone, and ignore whatever the teachers are giving or asking. What do you think about this, and how to solve that problem? I think she's talking about mostly a video call, video conference.
Yeah, I do hear of this issue also. Not just I think this is very, very common. I think that's why I think one thing about video conferencing or even just online lessons is that it is very passive. I think for most schools, what they are doing now is still that teachers will just lecture, and then students will just listen. I think what we can try to do is we can try to make the lesson much more active as opposed to passive. So what we talk about the different activities of getting students to do presentations or video homework and for them to share with the rest of the class, or maybe things like what we mentioned about scavenger hunt. Those could help. I believe those would definitely help. It's about engaging the students once again. I guess when students do that, when they turn off their mic and their camera, that means they are disengaged, right? So it's always about engaging the students again. But I guess definitely if the behavior persists, definitely speak to the student. I mean, we never know, maybe the student is struggling with something else. That's why they don't feel comfortable turning on the camera or the microphone. So definitely do treat everything with a case-by-case kind of basis.
Okay. Let me see if there are other questions here. Not yet. Okay, I have one last question for you, Darian. One of the things that many people here are worried is the learning loss, during this pandemic, like everyone feels that it's not as good as before. Is that real? I mean, is that really a concern even in Singapore or anywhere in the world, or is just something that just in our head? We can do this as effective, as before, just the way it's different. We have to adapt. What do you think about that?
I think I understand the anxiety of possibly how this is a generation that won't experience education that was as good as it is, or as good as it was. But I think that it's really a new normal. It's kind of inevitable. I don't think we should definitely wait for the situation to go back to what it was, but instead try to make the situation better. I think that's more important. It's about, what kind of resources we have and what we can make happen now, as opposed to what we think is lacking. I think usually I understand that it seems to be the case, but it's definitely a struggle that everyone has to overcome. And definitely, if we don't overcome those struggle, then we will keep staying backwards. So definitely this is the moment of the time where we have to move on and just keep going forward.
Great. I totally agree with you. Okay. I think we have no questions from the audience. Thank you very much, Darian, for your time. It's a quite interesting information that you shared. And hopefully, some of the ideas, some of the strategies can be implemented by the audience that come here today and watching our webinar today. And yeah, we are hoping that this pandemic, will end soon, so we can go back to our normal life again. And great. So thank you very much. Dan Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya juga mengucapkan terima kasih buat Anda semua yang telah hadir. Semoga acara ini bermanfaat dan mohon maaf jika ada hal yang kurang berkenan. Salam sehat untuk kita semua. Saya tutup dengan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om. Sampai jumpa lagi di acara yang datang. Terima kasih.